price to size ratio is a very important factor, in, let's say, whether a car is a success or not, So we've just got this mindset, I think, ingrained to us from the Maruti 800. Small cars are cheap and big cars you can charge more of a premium.
There's a thing that the line that I always like saying that, Indians, consumers, we don't pay for things we can't see.
I think the other big barrier or the big differentiation between any car in Europe and India is the focus on the back seat. It's just not there in European cars, all the way up to even luxury cars.
The Indian brands are focusing on the domestic market, but I think once they get a hold of production and things like that, now is perhaps the time for them to go back out and explore the world.
Luckily for manufacturers, they sell cars in the showrooms and not on social media.
Right.
Otherwise, they'd be making the most expensive car with all the features at no price, and they'd go bust. We are back with our weekly podcast, Deep Drive, powered by Kotak Mahindra Prime. Thanks for being here with us. Today we have a pretty interesting topic on this episode. It is on why the Indian market and even industry isn't quite global. So if you look at the most successful cars globally, they just don't sell in India, and the most successful cars in India, they don't sell globally. This is what we're going to be talking about on this episode. I'm Hormazd Sorabjee.
And I'm Sergius Barretto. And yeah, Hormazd, I think as you correctly said, the cars that, the top sellers abroad aren't really the top sellers or even exist here in India. And the cars that are top sellers here don't exist abroad. And I have a list here with me, Hormazd. Let's just look at, for example, the US. Well, I think before I get into the list, I think we can sort of generalize and say the reason why the US cars don't sell is they're just too big. Right, typical of America.
Big. I mean, America is all about wide open spaces, straight roads.
Exactly.
I remember when I go there, I'm just amazed by even the parking slots, in a mall. They are so wide.
Exactly.
You can literally open your door without hitting the other car. I mean, everything is just XL sized over there, super, super big. America's got the space. It's a large country.
Right.
And, everything is straight over there. It's quite flat. No mountains you have to wind around. So I think, I think it's just the kind of circumstance
right.
of.
Yeah, and if you look at it, Hormazd, all of the, I'm just going to read out a few of the top selling cars. The cars happen to be actually pickups in the US because they love their pickups.
And fuel is still relatively cheap.
Exactly.
Shot up through the years, but still relatively cheap compared to Europe or
here. So they can do big cars. So the Ford F-Series, the pickup, that's obviously the top. The Chevrolet Silverado is the third. The Toyota RAV4, okay, so that's, let's say, small by, US standards. That's the third largest selling. But if I look down, let's take a sedan because, the Camry, the largest selling sedan. That's a large sedan now for us.
Absolutely. I mean, that is really the core of the US market. As I said, they like big cars, and the fact is that cars are fundamentally cheap in the US. I think the Camry is the equivalent of maybe a Honda City here or even a Desire.
Yes.
So what's the price?
Yeah, they call this the regularized thing, and a small sedan for them is the Corolla and the Civic, which are also in the top list.
Right. Yeah. And a Camry isn't that expensive. It's about half the price of what it is here.
Yes, the Camry, in fact, I have that price almost. The Camry in the US cost about 24 lakh.
Right.
Equivalent. Whereas here we're paying 49 for the same engine.
Yeah, that's
the hybrid.
And with that level of GDP, it's all about GDP. Actually, that is what really drives let's say car sales, especially at the higher end. That's really what an average American could afford. In fact, probably a Camry.
Exactly. So that's the US market. I'll go to the UK now. In the UK, Europe, being that it is, they do like smaller cars. Again, they've got a lot of curvy roads, mountains, smaller, lighter.
The cities are much smaller.
Cities too, yes, exactly.
It's very crowded. It's very kind of, let's say, so many countries.
You go to Italy or Rome, it's worse than I think even Mumbai.
And don't forget, historically also, Europe is much older. America is a newer nation.
Right.
So it was the whole road building exercise was obviously part of a new country that had just been formed. As soon as cars got in there, Europe's been around for, transport's been there for thousands of years. So obviously everything horse-drawn over there. So clearly, it's evolved from that.
Absolutely. And so if you look at their list, one was the cars, the Ford Puma, smaller crossover, the Kia Sportage, Nissan Qashqai, the Nissan Juke. I mean, the Volkswagen Golf. That's a hatch, which...
I think the Volkswagen Golf is the quintessential, let's say, default car in Europe. I mean, a hatchback, a large hatchback, a family car. Golf has been around for generations. Really the staple car of Europe in that sense, or Germany, just the way the Maruti 800 was. In fact, initially the plan was to look at bringing the Golf to India when they were talking to Volkswagen. It never happened with Maruti when they were looking around for partners. So, yeah, you're right. And I think it's very interesting to see that the Golf would just not fly in India. Now, they're launching the Golf GTI at 50 lakhs. They just sell a couple of hundred units, CBU. But why a car like the Golf can't work, I think it's a lot to do with things in India which are price to size ratio. Firstly, they won't be able to price the Golf cheaply in India, even if they kind of localized it. The Polo, they had difficulty in doing. The Golf would be more expensive, and Indians fundamentally will not pay top dollar for a hatchback, even if it's a big hatchback.
Exactly.
It's just that body style, there's proper pecking order in India of body styles. And that's why a sedan has much more status and image than a hatchback does. SUV is right on top. Hatchback now, as a body style, is right at the lowest rung of the pecking order. And that's why hatchbacks typically are not doing well, or they're only focused on the budget end where, that's where they work. So really, the Golf doesn't even exist in India, and clearly it wouldn't work over here at all. Whereas the best-selling car in India is today the Tata Punch.
Exactly.
2024, okay, I don't know how long it'll hang on to that. Maybe it won't continue with that in 25, but, otherwise you've had consistent bestsellers like the Wagon-R,
Yes.
which has been there. And a Wagon-R, I mean, there's just no market for it globally. Again, if you see, that requirement is for cars which are slightly bigger, more power, more, let's say, just the safety, the quality, something that feels a lot more substantial. And, I don't think Wagon-R would cut it anywhere. And other car which is a really big seller is the Creta. And we've said this before, that the Creta is really a car that has been absolutely conceived spot on for the Indian market. And that's why it's doing very well. But globally, if you took that same car, it just wouldn't work over there, because there are things about the Creta which won't fly over there. I mean, just the finer details.
Exactly. No, Hormazd. In fact, a lot of people, and it's a good thing that you brought that up, a lot of people think that the Creta is a truly global model. It is global in the sense that it sells in about 40, 50 odd countries, but not in the US, not anywhere in Europe, in Western Europe, in advanced markets like the UK and things like that.
Yeah. So, I mean, advanced markets, we have to look at basically US, Europe, and Japan. And of course, China is a completely different beast altogether. Exactly. But, those cars, I mean, we have a big barrier, both ways. So we really don't consider that, let's say, a kind of a market that any of our products can have potential.
No, in fact, Hormazd, there's like you said, that car, the finer details is the Creta is what is holding it back from advanced markets. And you're absolutely spot on, because there's a thing that the line that I always like saying that, Indians, consumers, we don't pay for things we can't see, right? So we'll pay for a sunroof, right? But if you tell somebody, oh, look, this roof is laser welded, we've got, which the Polo had, and, the Volkswagen sales guys would cry themselves hoarse over that. We've got laser welding, we've got 7 coats of paint.
100% galvanized.
100% galvanized.
And then they dial that down.
Exactly.
Because you don't need 100% galvanized.
Yeah, and then, 7 coats of paint and a lot of good things, but and a consumer here can't see it, we don't pay for it. Whereas in Europe, they want all of that. Your favorite example of piano black, right? When Indian brands do it, you can see the reflection of, let's say, a finger is not uniform.
Correct. It's wavy.
A wavy surface.
And I think the
European cars, it's mirror, right? It's mirror finish.
And exactly, I think, again, a classic example is the Creta and the Tucson. The Tucson is fundamentally a global product which has been brought here via TKD. You see the piano black finish on that. You see the kind of cabin lighting, the small details on that. They're costly, but they make that little bit of a difference. You see the cabin lighting in the Creta vis-a-vis a Tucson. Just not the same. The way the door pockets are illuminated, that it's not there. Now, you can say that's of a more expensive segment, but it's just the way that it's done. The overall fit and finish of the dashboard. A lot of the molds have to be, a lot of them are in global models are laser edged. So they have a certain fit and finish which is just not there in Indian cars. I mean, I'll give you one classic example of Volkswagen. Volkswagen, you take the Polo and you take a Virtus, for example, and small things like the carpeting in the boot, for example. In the Virtus, it's a little wavy, not quite there, not super important. It's not got that tight, snug feel. Then when you ask, you know what the differences are. Firstly, the imported one uses a slightly thicker GSM, what they call, or a thickness.
Yes.
So you get the better fit, and it's molded. So it's just you kind of fit it on, you clip it on, because the whole thing is hard molded, so it's easy to do that. Whereas it's not in let's say a Virtus, where it's just kind of applied on. So there'll be that little waviness and things like that. These small details. You can't blame the manufacturers, because the taxes are fundamentally so high that they have to whittle down cost to be competitive in what is an extremely price sensitive market. Yeah.
So absolutely. In fact, Hormazd, I was talking to a seat manufacturer, I think at the expo, who bumped into me. And, we just started talking about how they stitch the fabric on the seats. And he said that, look, we export a lot. He said, but to be very frank, all of the export seats, we use a different machine, which is more expensive and has some different kind of needles and things like that. It gets a straighter line. And he said, the ones that we send for the local manufactured cars and even Indian brands, it's never absolutely straight. And I think you and I, we've noticed this, right? Sometimes it will just meander around a bit.
A lot of it is done manually, which is the cheaper way to do it. It's done by hand. So it really obviously don't get that same level of fit and finish. So I think, this is a great topic for social media to be, again, very righteous and say, how can we not get global quality, and Indian brands are taking us for a ride. But the fact is that, look, no one's in here for charity. They're here for business.
Exactly.
The taxes are super high, especially on the more, when you get up to 48% levels of GST plus cess, which really makes cars super expensive. You have to find some ways of cutting costs. And it's really the balance. And as you very rightly said, it's the perceived value, the perceived quality that really is the formula for making a car successful. And what that is in India and what that is in Europe is completely different. And one of my favorite examples is, I think last year when I was in London, I had got a media car from Audi. It was a Q5 plug-in hybrid, nice car. And I got in, and the first thing I did was try to do an electrical adjust for the seat. And I said, where the hell is it? Normally they have it down. Mercedes has it here. It was not there. There was no electric adjust. It was manual. Everything was manual. And I said, wow, the media car. But, frankly, that's what it is over there. There was no sunroof.
Right.
None of that fancy bells and whistles. But it was a car that just drove brilliantly. It was rock solid on the motorways over there. The brakes, everything, just the way it felt. And the handle was just absolutely spot on. Ergonomics, just good. It's that absolute maturity of the product that really shone through, minus all these other gizmos and stuff like that. And on the flip side, we've seen something like the Mahindra's latest BE6 cars, where you've just got all the gizmos in there.
Right.
And that car, I think people would really, would kind of go away from. They wouldn't want all this kind of shosha in the car over there. People are a lot more understated in Europe. So it's really, I think, it's different markets and it's different, let's say, customer preferences, which kind of is the biggest barrier. I think customer preferences is the biggest barrier of why, let's say, global cars don't, or successful cars globally don't do well here, and Indian cars don't have that much any export market at all.
Any potential. Yeah, absolutely. And it's not to say Indian cars weren't exporting. Let's say Tata Motors, they used to export to European countries, Western European countries, Spain or the UK. They never did well. They've dialed that back down now considerably.
The Indian market has exploded, so they're focusing on the Indian market. And I think also one has to understand that, again, this whole concept of a global car, frankly, doesn't exist. And interesting you say that about Tata, because when they developed the Vista, which is the X1 platform, and they're getting the benefit right now, it was meant for European export markets. Don't forget, they were exporting to Europe. They had dealers in even countries like Italy.
Yeah.
Places like Malta and all, not so much in, let's say more the southern countries in Europe, Spain, all that. So you would see even Indy cars over there. So they had a proper dealer network. They were exporting to these countries. And the thinking with the Vista was that we will, create a platform which is worthy, which can be, let's say, Europe ready. But there came a cost to that, and that was reflected then finally, even in the so-called economics of that platform. So it was heavy, obviously, to meet crash requirements. But when you have develop a car for Europe, you have that cost structure which you then carry to the Indian domestic model, which really makes you uncompetitive. Another classic example is the XUV 300, which is a SsangYong Tivoli platform. Again, a bit heavy, built for export to Europe. It did do that. It was at its peak. It was really selling really well in Korea as well. In fact, that was a car that gave SsangYong one of those few years of break even out of their losses. But again, when they looked at the XUV 300, 3XO, they've tried to kind of, take out that cost wherever it is. So a lot of people ask, what is this cost? What is the European cost that does not work over here? So a couple of things. One is, to be honest, it's in crash. Right. Because whatever you say, the crash standards over here, they may be, but even GN cap is, very often not as stringent as, let's say, Euro NCAP. So, or some people don't even want to have a good GN cap rating, and they are happy to, just meet the Indian standards, UN standards, which are pretty good in any case. But again, it's legally they can do that. So it's each one's strategy. I think it's all down to the steel. Let's say, again, to give an example of Volkswagen, the Polo initially came with 100% imported steel, POSCO, and then it was locally done, but it was then 100% zinc galvanized. Now it's not. Again, to galvanize steel, it costs, from what I understand, is around, about 200 euros. So it all adds to the cost of the car. That's the cost. When it goes to an on-road price with all the taxes, you normally double it. So that's 400 euros. It's a fair bit, it adds to the cost of the car. The reason also is that in Europe, because of the salt on the road, corrosion is a big issue. So you need much more corrosion protection from galvanizing the steel. In India, you don't need so much, so you remove it over there. So I think with the steel, a lot of them have been playing around, and it's fair to say that very often the quality of steel is not the same as the quality of steel in global models. Again, taking Volkswagen as an example, the outer door, which is not load bearing, so it doesn't affect crash at all, is about 0.1 mm thinner than what you'd have in Europe. So you won't get that same door shut as you would in a European car. But again, these are compromises where they have to save.
Right. The outer door being the skin.
The outer door being the skin. Yeah, that's right. So I think, from the product point of view, it's just that our taxes are so high. You have to cut costs where, as you rightly said, the customer can't see it. And at the same time, you have to add where the customer wants it, like, sunroofs and big screens, cool seats,
ambient lighting,
all that stuff, which they want. And, Europeans don't want that. Yeah. And that's why, it's a far more profitable business in Europe. So that's how it is.
No, and Hormazd, it's also, like you spoke of the Mahindra cars, they've got a lot of, flash. And assume, let's say, even a European market or an American market might want that flash. They also want the finesse along with the products. Exactly. So they want the piano black to be absolutely surface smooth. They want the stitching lines neat. For us, sometimes we're just oblivious to it. I've seen Indian consumers, it doesn't even register to us that, hey, look, that line is not straight, or, there's the door handles. Great example is the Polo. For so long, they had these damped release grab handles. Maruti on the Swift, they had these ones from, I think, possibly the Omni or something. They were just coming back, carry over. No, in fact, the first one was, I think, was a fixed one also, if I'm not mistaken. So people didn't care. It just didn't care. Whereas, I think consumers in markets like the Europe would look at that and think, no, this isn't great. Where's the coat hook in there? So I think it's a maturity, right?
Yeah. It is, absolutely. And I think but what would be interesting to see, there are some models which are sold in Europe and sold in India, almost the same models, but at different price points, which goes to show what margins brands have in Europe. Let's say the i20, for example. i20 sells in Europe and it sells in India as well.
In fact, I have that price somewhere here, Hormazd.
So it's about 20 plus lakhs in Europe.
Yeah, 22 lakh. So in Europe.
Wow. So a 22, and
starting.
So what does that tell you? That number one, firstly, they've got a huge margin to play with. They can obviously put features that the Europeans want in their car. So, and I think in India, in terms of absolute, let's say, equipment, you probably get more over here at a lesser price.
Right.
So clearly, there are
something's got to give somewhere.
Got to give somewhere, and I think normally that comes, as you said, in things you can't see over
quality.
here.
And almost, in fact, it's not just the steel. It's even the plastic.
That's right.
For example, soft touch plastics are used almost everywhere. Let's say in a comparable model, whereas in India, it's the first thing they'll start reducing, whether it's the quality of the plastic. A good example is, I'm going way back to the Ford Icon, which was a car built for India, right? It was conceived for India. Yeah. The plastic, Hormazd, was, I'm forgetting, there was a code to it, but it was a plastic that would fade in the sunlight.
Yeah.
Would yellow with age. And so the headlight lenses...
Very, very hard plastic.
Yeah, the headlight lenses would yellow.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas the Opel Corsa, and they were still importing those headlight units from, I think, Spain or somewhere, it would be like, clear after 4-5 years.
It started better. It was the Icon. Yeah.
Yeah, correct.
So I think clearly, I think what's very clear is that in the end, it's a business. You have to give the customer what he is willing to pay for, what he wants, and find that balance. Right. So luckily for manufacturers, they sell cars in the showrooms and not on social media.
Right.
Otherwise, they'd be making the most expensive car with all the features at no price, and they'd go bust. But I think but there are some other factors, key factors, which I think have why this barrier is there, of why global cars kind of can't work here and vice versa. And I think that's a sub-4 meter rule.
Absolutely.
It's very unique to India. There's really no market for sub-4 meter cars abroad. And they don't have sub-4 meter cars for you to bring here so you can price them competitively. You have to literally develop them for India, which is not easy to do. Classic example is the Kailak, which fundamentally I think only India is one of the only markets. So, you can imagine the pressure there is on keeping costs down, because the scale is limited only to the volumes and scale limited only to the Indian market. Whereas even the Kushaq, to be honest, or Taigun, it can go to places like South Africa. But again, these cars cannot sell in Europe for reasons what we've said here. So you've got the equivalent, which is the T-Cross of the Taigun.
Right.
You see the cars are very, very different, and you can see the kind of level of content, the material that's been put in that is quite different. So I think the sub-4 meter rule, or the benefit you get under sub-4 meters in cars in India, has really been one of the biggest barriers as well, because then it's not a level playing field. You're already working with a high cost structure. Then if you don't get the benefit of lower tax, cars, best-selling cars like the Golf, they can never come in here. It just doesn't make sense at all as a mainstream car.
As a mainstream car.
So a lot of these mainstream cars, and I think also don't forget, everything's gone so much to SUVs as well. But that's gone globally. So a lot of the models globally just don't transport to India. I mean, you take the top companies, you'll see a lot of them don't really work over here. There are a few exceptions.
True, absolutely.
I think Maruti being one of them. You've got the Swift here, which is super successful. It doesn't do too badly in Europe as well. I mean, it is quite an iconic car of Suzuki's there, from a Suzuki point of view. But they're both very different there
exactly.
again. I think
built to a different quality standard.
Built to a different standards. Now, I think the sheet metal is different. There the cars are, I think, imported from Japan.
Right.
Over here the cars are made fundamentally for the local market. I think on engines, we are comparable, because the engines usually, we have a similar emission standard, though they have now gone to Euro 6D, which is again more stringent. But you can use, let's say more bells and whistles in your in cars over there, whether it's let's say piezo injectors for diesel vis-a-vis solenoid. You can just have a lot more tech in engines over there because again, customers are willing to pay for it, and the cost to the OEMs are there because they don't have the kind of duty structures we have here.
Absolutely. No, in fact, Hormazd, when you mentioned Swift, I was reminded also of another car of Suzuki, the A-Star, way back.
But that again is a classic example of it
Exactly.
being made for Europe.
Exactly.
And it failed here
It failed
because it leads me to another point.
The rear seat space.
Exactly. You in India, it's not, you don't need to have the maximum amount of rear seat space, but you have to have the minimum amount of it. And it failed that requirement.
Exactly.
So it's a great example of an A-Star designed and conceived by Suzuki for Europe, but it bombed over here. Largely because of the rear seat space.
Correct.
It was a car, quite a cute looking car. I like the design actually.
Right.
It was quite funky, and so really that car made for Europe did not do well here.
Yeah, and Hormazd, on that car, for a long time, because it wasn't doing well in India, so Suzuki have this thing where every year they do this cost cutting thing. So maybe the sun visors will get thinner and things like that. That car never underwent that exercise because it was just too expensive to bother re-engineering certain things because there was no domestic volume.
Sometimes to re-engineer and pull out content is more expensive than just leaving it in there.
Exactly. So if you look at an A-Star, my son has one, so I know the sun visors, thicker, much nicer quality than, let's say, the Celerios or the Altos of that time.
Correct.
Right? Everything inside there, was of a higher sort of fit and finish.
And I think the challenge for the OEM is that consumers will compare that with a Celerio in terms of size or whatever. They won't see these finer things and look, I'm getting a really superior quality car. So, but they look at the size and they look at the price. So price to size ratio is a very important factor, in, let's say, whether a car is a success or not, So we've just got this mindset, I think, ingrained to us from the Maruti 800. Small cars are cheap and big cars you can charge more of a premium on. I think that is changing. But that's the reason why big hatchbacks will never fly, and and generally, and big SUVs, there's more of a case for that. But again, sticking to the A-Star, I think the other big barrier or the big differentiation between any car in Europe and India is the focus on the back seat. It's just not there in European cars, all the way up to even luxury cars. I mean,
you've got to get into the S territory,
exactly,
S class,
which
and
is too expensive. You take a C class, you take an A4. Now BMW with the 3 long wheelbase has beaten that. And I think that's why these long wheelbase models are becoming.
That's why they are popular in India and China. Yeah.
Again, only in India and China, not in Europe.
Not in Europe.
So again, it's this whole issue of what works here doesn't work there. In Europe, that is. So I think, but the absolute focus on the rear seat, how important it is in India, really, again, is a big determining factor in the, let's say, success of a car. And again, I like to come back again to the Creta because that really is a car that's understood the Indian consumer. It's got the right formula, and that's why it's selling so well. A very decent back seat, so that's really, I think, one of the reasons why that does quite well.
And in fact, its inspiration, Hormazd, is another car of the similar formula, the Renault Duster, which was actually the Dacia.
That's right.
Right. So built for a sort of emerging market, built to a very tight cost and a thinner margin, and worked well in India.
It worked well until the Creta came along because there was nothing better.
Right.
But again, I think the mistake is that what works in Eastern Europe just does not work well in India, because in Eastern Europe, your general...
You're thinking about the Logan and things like that.
Exactly. They want something more functional, utilitarian. They don't really care for all the bells and whistles and the stature and stuff like that. It's a much more mature market. It doesn't work here. Logan was a classic example as well, getting the car here. And again, Logan, very, very high cost structure in terms of the engine. That whole engine was imported. So really, it kind of made it very, very difficult to price there. But there is one car actually that has done quite well in India and in Europe and in the US and in Latin America. The EcoSport.
Yes. Right.
So the EcoSport is one of those cars which kind of hit that sweet spot for everyone. I think it was the look, it was the concept, a real first compact SUV. I think
Timing was just right, I think, for that.
yeah, the timing was just right. In India, it worked well, and it was felt bigger than it was because we measured the 4 meters up to the tailgate, not the spare wheel, which was outside the 4 meter rule. So it had that extra length. And yeah, I think in India, what worked really was the phenomenal pricing and the way it drove. It wasn't great in the backseat as well, but it has, as I said, that minimal level
Just
of
what acceptable, yes.
acceptable, and the price and the way it drove, really kind of made it a winner. It was our car of the year as well.
Correct.
Launched at 5.69, and I think that's one car that I would say has done fairly well globally. Didn't get great reviews in Europe and UK and US, but it still was there, and it did sell in some substantial numbers, and very much in Latin America, which is very much a market very similar to ours. In fact, there's one market is Latin America and South Africa, where a lot of our cars go.
Yeah, in fact, Hormazd, South Africa, the country that they import the most number of cars from is India.
That's right.
It's they have a local, of course, assembly and manufacturing, but they import a lot, and India happens to be the country with the largest number of exports to them. So yeah, obviously our cars built here are working there.
That's
Absolutely.
right. Yeah. And Sergius, another model that is a global model that actually should have done well here is the Compass.
Yeah, absolutely. Our car of the year.
That's right, exactly. Right. I mean, it was launched at a fantastic price. It got an initial run.
Did well initially.
It did well initially. Not too much competition. And actually, it was really, in terms of engineering, product, the ride, phenomenal 4x4.
Quality inside as well. I mean, all the materials, the dash.
Exactly. And that quality took a jump with the facelift where they changed the dashboard. It was quite a major facelift when they came out with that. But again, that fundamental issue of that price to size ratio, much more expensive than a Creta, but rear seat space, probably a little less. So again, that kind of mismatch, which is so critical for the Indian market.
Right.
I think that's what, and then again, typical thing which global companies didn't do. They had the automatic only in the very expensive 4x4. Then
diesel automatic two-wheel drive.
The diesel automatic two-wheel drive took a long time to come. Now you can understand why they had to develop it, especially for India. Not easy. Needs a lot of investment. Needs engineering resource. A lot of people think you can just bring it like that. You can't. So you can understand their situation. But clearly a mismatch between the requirements globally and what there is in India with this product. So classic example. And don't forget, they exited petrol.
Yes.
Which again, just when petrol sales were going up, because they didn't have an engine suitable enough to upgrade to BS6, and the volumes are so small. Again, it was just too costly. Now they got a 1.3 engine, which is doing quite well in Brazil, in the Commander, which is actually the Meridian. So that car's doing very well in Latin America, but in India, both Meridian and Compass, they've really bombed, and I think it's basically. Because it's just out of sync with what customer requirements are. Fantastic products. That's really the tragedy of it. I mean, the ride of the Compass, the capability of the Compass, you can just go anywhere in it. But again, I think it just as I said, out of sync. And Sergius, another company, Citroen.
Yeah, part of the group.
Yeah.
Yes.
C3, the C3 in India and the C3 in Europe, both very different cars.
But that's the funny part of the C3, our topic of discussion today. It is basically all about cars should be engineered for India. With the Citroen C3, they made an attempt to engineer a car specifically for India, but I think they engineered the car for an India in 1980.
Yeah.
They went with a larger car, it's got a lot of volume, and it's got a good engine. Yes, old India, we used to shop as 800cc or 1000cc, but I think gone are those days. Today, people want a lot of features first, even before a 200cc engine size, right? And they just didn't equip it at all.
That's right. Absolutely. I think, again, a very capable car. Yeah. Again, two different platforms. Again, the C3, what they have in Europe, it wouldn't fly over here. It would just be too expensive. And the C3 we make over here, it's just got no export potential in these key markets. So, really, I think it's a tough, it's a balance that global, let's say, manufacturers are struggling to find. And that's why we have this sort of situation.
Absolutely.
So I think, I think going forward, I mean, I kind of, in a way, see this differentiation increasing because I think we are just obsessed with the features. We are in a, arms war race for the screen race, so it's quite...
Do you think it will increase, or Hormazd, do you think it would actually kind of merge in the sense that, because we are getting more discerning now, we are wanting more from our cars. Would it get to the point where, and we've always said India's a tough market, where we would want the features, but we'd also want the finish?
Yeah.
Do you think it would?
So I think we are still on our journey of motorization. Don't forget our income levels are very low in India, on an average $3,500, per capita income, and in mature markets, the big car markets is above $10,000. So I mean, you even see China, which is so much higher. So I think we are still in that aspiration stage of owning the car. So you will want the glitz, the glamour, the status, and won't be too pernickety about that absolute detail of quality. So I think it will take
some time,
take a generation or two to realize sometimes that less is more. I think the way to sum it up is that we want more is more, So I think that's how it is. Whereas in Europe, less is more. You see the cars. I mean, you see something like even Hyundai. You see the Creta, for example. They've used the same kind of European philosophy in the way they've laid out things vis-a-vis what Mahindra has done. But clearly, the Indian customers want as much as possible. They want all the bells and whistles. I think we'll take a generation to go through that, first taste of that experience, and then come back to a kind of been there, done that, kind of a, let's say, situation where you just be happy with something that works flawlessly, performs well, super fit and finish, works consistently. Consistently, the things like the way things perform with linearity, that's that feeling of, it's just absolutely spot on. Everything is quite spot on, and there are no rough edges. I would say we still have a lot of rough edges in our cars, and that's how it is. And again, I think a classic example we have to see also is the Honda Elevate. It's, to be honest, not done well in India over here.
Yes, it is.
Look at it compared to the Creta, where the Creta sales are, I think factor of maybe 5 times more, or maybe more.
About 2,000 odd units, I think, the Elevate.
That's a 10,000 plus. Whereas in Japan, it's a very popular car, where it's sold as a WRV.
Which comes from here.
Which is the exact car.
Which is built
from here. Which built over here. Okay, there may be a few changes. So what does that tell you? That they are just appreciating Honda's strengths of solid engineering, car that dynamically very good, which the Elevate is. It's got decent space. It handles well and is very functional, with good space and a good boot. And that's what they want. Now, a Creta, no chance would it sell in Japan, but the Elevate is doing well in Japan. And again, to end on the export numbers, what you see, the cars which are being exported are really the global brands which are using India as a manufacturing base and going over there. Tata numbers are absolutely minuscule, completely non-existent.
Also, I think
Mahindra's definitely more, and I think now the 3XO is doing really well in South Africa. But again, it's not in the big car markets, the big advanced mature markets of the US, and also we're really a long way there. So to call ourselves global, we are nowhere we are global, but I think it's all part of a journey. People are taking advantage of the global market, and that's where, taking advantage of the Indian market. And that's where the focus has to be, because, in this time, you can't kind of have both.
Right.
And if you make one car for both markets, you're going to compromise somewhere. If you make a car for global markets in India, it'll just be too expensive for India, and with some requirements the Indian customers won't want here. So I think Indian market, very, very unique. And a big market which everyone is tapping into, but it'll be a while before we see some kind of
level.
That's right. Yeah, we see absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And Hormazd, I think now we've discussed, I think, most of the major hurdles. There are also some smaller ones which are, again, very sort of peculiar. Ground clearance, getting a car from any advanced market like the US or Europe, they're built low to the ground because the roads are good there.
And more so with EVs now. EVs.
Exactly. Whereas for us, you've got to not just raise them. Sometimes the suspension is what they call the rough road package, right? The Europeans have this. So that's also, I think, a smaller consideration, but it's a consideration still.
But the big consideration, because we have these Mount Everest speed breakers, so you tend to ground your car. I mean, it's really terrible that manufacturers have to raise the suspension, because any car with a race suspension just does not have the same dynamics of what it was originally meant to be.
It's potentially also reducing your fuel efficiency.
It does. I mean, firstly, there are camber changes which happen. The whole geometry goes for a toss, which you can't re-engineer because it would mean changing the length of certain arms and linkages and stuff like that. So you've just got to live with that. And I think the other challenge also is that there's a lot of move towards lower profile tires, which again really impact the ride on our roads.
Yeah.
And you can't even go to higher profile tires because that would mean reducing the wheel size. And now the brake discs are getting so bigger and bigger. So there's a limit to how much you can reduce the wheel size as well. So really, the terrible road conditions, again, is a big challenge to bring global models to India. I think another key area where there's a big difference between, let's say, global models and cars over here is in NVH. Now, to improve NVH by a little sometimes is a disproportionate cost to the OEM. So they'd rather compromise on that. As it is, we live in a very noisy situation with horns and, all that sort of thing going. So NVH also not absolutely super important, especially at the base end. And I think that's where there's a lot of compromise being done. I mean, one example also was the Etios. Now, the Etios didn't succeed, but, speaking to the engineers, I know they had compromised a lot on the NVH package. That's a lot of material, that's a lot of insulation, that brings a lot of cost to the car. So by removing that, you save a lot and, customer might accept it at that level. So I think these are whereas in Europe,
They won't.
they wouldn't. They want that ultimate refinement. They just want the car, as I said, just to be just so. So I think these are really the small nuances which, make the difference. But actually, they're very, very costly.
Absolutely. And Hormazd, this cost and the NVH package often also brings weight, significant weight, which
That's right.
impacts fuel efficiency, which is another thing that we are crazy about.
Correct.
Right. So, I mean, manufacturers are stripping that out, in the interest.
But having said that, there's one manufacturer who I think has made NVH kind of their benchmark and their standard is Mahindra.
Right.
I mean, especially we drove the B6 and it was unbelievably refined. Much more than, let's say, the Windsor, which we had. Okay, different price points. But, after that, you could hear all the road noise and everything coming in. And even their diesels, their petrols, NVH has been top class. So, you've got companies taking that effort to kind of show a differentiation. But generally at the lower end, let's say in the sub 10 lakh category, I think NVH is something that in India is hugely compromised on. Engines are generally noisy. I think we've seen that even in a car like the Elevate. There's quite a noisy car where NVH has been compromised because there's a huge saving. If you kind of avoid giving all that kind of encapsulation and insulation and material is needed for that.
Hormazd, and yes, the Indian brands are focusing on the domestic market, but I think once they get a hold of, production and things like that, now is perhaps the time for them to go back out and explore the world. For Tata especially, they had, like we spoke of, Italy, Spain. Mahindra should expand beyond there because regulation-wise, I think in the Indian market is very close to the European and US markets. Yeah. And then the cars themselves, they're getting world class in terms of at least the basic.
Yeah, not so much the US market, that's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah.
And their liability issues are there.
Correct.
But I think close to Europe, definitely, I think that should be the real target. And I think when Indian cars can be seen on European roads as a starting point, on UK roads, then you know that they have become truly global. I think this is going to be the next step for the Indian OEMs. Don't forget, they're in a very early phase of their life, actually, of their development in that way. So especially with EVs, everyone is learning that. There's a lot of opportunity there. Of course, don't forget there's a lot of competition out there. Chinese are ruling the world right now in this space. They've just taken such a march over us in that sense. We wonder we'll ever catch up. But I think we do have our advantages. I think the way we have this balance of, solid engineering and cost is something that we can do quite well. And I think, let's say, even for a company like Mahindra, for them now, getting into Europe should be the focus.
Absolutely.
But it requires immense resources, immense bandwidth, immense manpower. and you're starting from nothing. So, it's a huge investment. Whereas right now you've got a captive market over here. This market inside out. You're doing well over here. Mahindra really is the toast of the town. Even Tatas have done extremely well in India. So when that happens, you do tend to prioritize, and you have to prioritize in this business because resources is one thing that is hugely limited: manpower, capital, everything.
Exactly.
But I think until we see Indian brands all over the world, it's only then we can say that our industry is truly global.
Right. Plus, you've also got to add in the fact that they've got to build their brand also. The brand image for Mahindra, Tata doesn't exist in these markets. So that's right. Another cost that they have to bear.
Exactly. Mahindra have gone to markets like Australia, which is good, but it's still a long ways to go over there. They're really got up against a giant like Toyota over there. So clearly, they've got to fight. There's a steep, uphill battle. But I think at least there is a starting point. And I think what's really important is that the success in the domestic market is the springboard that can give confidence to Indian brands to go global. So with that, we wrap up this episode of Deep Drive. Hope you've enjoyed watching it. Don't forget to tune in again, same time Saturday, that's 11 o'clock. And to make sure you don't miss any of our episodes, do click on the bell icon to stay notified. Thanks for watching.